All right, everybody, welcome back into cherry picking. Another video as I break down my way too early, I guess it wouldn't be way too early, but just early Stanley Cup contenders and predictions out of the top 16 favorites on the board right now. So hockey news still flying off the shelves. Obviously, Auston Matthews recently just re-signed an extension, making him the highest paid player in the NHL after this season is done. I'll touch on that and why Leafs fans can expect pretty much nothing to change with that team and how they'll be producing, and then also giving out my top picks for the Stanley Cup with the regular season almost a month away. All right, so looking at the top 8 favorites here, obviously you have the Colorado Avalanche plus 850 as the favorite right now. Carolina not far behind them at plus 950. It drops off a little bit after that with the Oilers, Devils, and Leafs all at 11-1. Then you have last year's Stanley Cup champions, the Golden Knights at 13-1, and then Lightning and the Bruins to kind of round out that list. So the Avalanche, for one, I won't be really looking at them. I don't think it's a great pick at this point. I think they'll have some growing pains in that forward group. You know, you bring in Jonathan Drouin, who'll be probably playing on that first line with Nathan McKinnon. You have Miles Wood, Ryan Johansson, Ross Colton, some more role guys that will play a little bit further down the lineup. But at plus 850, I just wouldn't be taking a chance on a team that's so new in terms of their forward group. They saw it switch so much last year. I'm not going to be taking my chance there. But the Carolina Hurricanes, I think, are a really interesting pick. And I think this could be the year that they finally break through and win the Stanley Cup, have a really good playoffs. For one, they brought on some great players. I think they probably had the best offseason, I would say, of most teams or most contending teams at this point. Michael Bunting, I think, is a great addition for this group. He'll probably be playing on a line with Seth Jarvis. That'll be a great second line for this team. You know, Bunting, a gritty forward that can actually have a net presence. That's something they've really missed on this Carolina team so far. And then you look at defensemen. Definitely the best defensive group at this point after adding Dmitry Orlov, who had 36 points in 66 games last year with Washington and Boston. And then Tony DeAngelo, who had 51 points in 64 games just a season ago with Carolina as well. And you look at this team last year, 5-on-5, they're essentially a perfect hockey team on paper. They led the NHL in Corsi for, expected goals for, expected goals against, high danger chances for as well, and then finished in third in shots per game. They had an elite penalty kill. The one knock on them last year was their power play. For whatever reason, they just couldn't generate enough scoring chances, and we saw their success rate drop from 22% down to 19%. Their power play was ranked 20th last year. When you're looking at their group, Andrei Svechnikov, Sebastian Aho, and some of the defensemen that they have, you just wouldn't think that this group would finish 20th in power play. But I think with the additions that they brought on, it will really help. Michael Bunting will help on that second unit. As I mentioned before, that net presence will be so valuable, especially considering Rob Brind'Amour really likes to activate his defensemen on the power play. And now you have the addition of Dmitry Orlov and Tony DeAngelo, two puck-moving defensemen who can score as well. So you have that presence from the blue line, you know, getting pucks on net, Michael Bunting in front of the net, and then that first line as well. You know, I think they'll just have a lot more success as a group. So I really like the Carolina Hurricanes this year. I think when you're looking at these top 8 teams, this is probably the best bet at this point. And then you look at the Toronto Maple Leafs, obviously at 11-1. Sure, they re-signed Auston Matthews, a good deal. It doesn't really take into effect until next year, but it's a player's contract at a 4-year extension, not one of those 8-year extensions we've seen McKinnon sign or McDavid in the past. But 55% of your cap hit is still invested into 4 players. So you're going to struggle to find any quality defenseman to sign after that. And then also you're looking at your depth forwards. It just won't be as good moving on as you've seen in the past. Tyler Bertuzzi, great signing, I think, this year, but he'll be a 1-year rental. And I think you could probably say the same thing for Max Domi as well. Vegas is pretty much in the exact same spot as last year, I would think. They are 13-1 on the board right now. They didn't really lose anyone or add anyone, but their biggest strength in the postseason that helped them beat teams like the Edmonton Oilers and Dallas Stars with a lot of firepower on offense, defensive depth, and big bodies. And I think Carolina does the exact same thing with the guys like Brent Burns, but I actually think this defensive core that they have is easily the best in the NHL this year and better than the Vegas group that they had that won the Stanley Cup last year. So that's really what I'm banking on to think Carolina will take home the Stanley Cup in 2024. All right, looking at the next 8 teams here, this is 8-16. Lead the list here, the Stars at 16-1. Won't really touch on them too much. I think the 2 teams we should really talk about from this list are the Los Angeles Kings and the New York Rangers, both priced the same at FanDuel at 20-1. The Kings, obviously you bring in PLD, Pierre-Luc Dubois. He's an interesting case because he has complained pretty much everywhere he's gone, whether it be the coaching or the city he's been in. But, you know, to his defense a little bit, Columbus, Winnipeg, not the greatest destinations to end up in. So I'm sure he'll love Los Angeles and this team too. A lot of young talent and also a lot of veteran presence that is going to really help this team maybe make an even deeper push in the playoffs this season. You also have Quinton Byfield. I talked about him in my last video, talking about him as a breakout candidate in fantasy hockey. I think just overall, he has that presence and that potential this year. You look at what he did last year, he only scored 2 goals. He didn't play a ton of his games in the NHL. You know, he spent some time in the AHL as well, but he's a big forward that has great vision, and he does have the ability to score goals. Also, although we haven't seen it at the pro level just yet, we saw it in Sudbury. He was a great goal scorer and a great point getter for that team. It just hasn't translated yet. So we'll see how he develops this year. And then you also bring in Brandt Clark, who will probably be making this roster this season. 2021 8th overall overall pick. You add that to an already great defensive core as well. You know, they got Gavrikov at the trade deadline last year along with Korpisalo. He's gone, unfortunately, but they're able to keep Gavrikov, and then obviously Drew Doughty's leading this defensive unit. Mikey Anderson proved to be a lot better last year as well, and as a whole, this group proved to be very good together. You know, second in expected goals against in 5-on-5 last season, only behind the Carolina Hurricanes, and they also allowed the 4th fewest shots last season. So the two biggest question marks, I would say, are goaltending, because right now their starting goaltender is Phoenix Copley, and then you also have Cam Talbot. I think their defense made him look a little bit better last year, so we'll see how he kind of tests out at the beginning of this season, and then their young talent just really needs to produce. You know, I mentioned Quinton Byfield. Arthur Kaliev as well was a fantastic in the OHL with Kingston and has a rocket of a shot, so we'll see how those guys develop, but I think they're a really interesting team to keep your eye on, because I think they can win the Pacific. I think they can compete with Vegas, and I think they can compete with Edmonton. All right, so the other team that I mentioned on this list is the New York Rangers. I'll be honest, the Rangers analytics last year were horrible, but you still look at this team who finished with 107 points and 3rd in a really tough Metropolitan division. Let's look at some of their analytics. You know, 22nd in expected goals for across the league, 17th in Corsi for percentage, and then 19th in high danger chances for. I just think last year some of the players that were on this team, especially after the trade deadline, like bringing in Vladimir Tarasenko and Patrick Kane were not the two players that needed to bring in to really make a playoff push. But I think what they did this offseason, you know, they got rid of those two players, brought in some other guys, brought in a new coach as well, which I think is the biggest change here, because Peter Laviolette has that pedigree as well. Obviously won a Stanley Cup with the Carolina Hurricanes back in 05 and 06, and then also went to the Stanley Cup finals with the Philadelphia Flyers and the Nashville Predators in his 2 stints there. So I think he's going to be a huge addition to this team, especially considering all the talent they have on defense. And I think the coaching change is really the biggest thing here. You know, bring in Peter Laviolette, a guy who won a Stanley Cup with the Carolina Hurricanes in 05 and 06, went to the Stanley Cup finals with the Nashville Predators in his stint there, and as well with the Philadelphia Flyers. The biggest thing here and the biggest change I think we will see with this New York Rangers team, they have so many great defensemen that I think we're kind of underutilized with Gallant at the helm. You have Adam Fox, who obviously won a Norris with him, but I think Peter Laviolette will exact even bigger production from him. Condre Miller, a guy I think is going to be a fantastic defenseman this year and will end up with a ton of points. Bryn Schneider as well. I think even on that last pair with Eric Gustafsson, a guy that Peter Laviolette has gotten a lot of in the past, will be a great, I guess you could say, last pair duo on this team. And then they also brought in Blake Wheeler, a guy who I think a lot of players, and not players, but teams were out on, but I think Blake Wheeler is still a very good veteran presence to have on this New York Rangers team. You know, they just re-signed Alexis Lafreniere as well. He's kind of in the same boat as Quinton Byfield. It's boom or bust at this point. He is pretty much his last year to produce. He'll be playing on that kid line that we've seen before with Capo Caco and Philip Hedl. But Blake Wheeler, 55 points in both his last 2 seasons, and he didn't even play full seasons in either of those, or full games in either of those seasons. So bringing in the experience with Blake Wheeler, and then some guys to work on their depth, their 4th line with Nick Bonino, a guy who's been to the Stanley Cup finals and has played a lot of playoff games. Tyler Pitlick as well, a little bit of a speedster and more of a presence on that 4th line as well. And then not to mention their outstanding goaltender in Igor Shesterkin, a guy who's carried this team, I think, over the past 2 years and made them look a lot better on the ice than they were on paper. So I think the Rangers are a really interesting option at 20-1 at this point. A team as well like the Kings, keep your eye on them, because I think they're going to make a lot of noise in the Eastern Conference. All right, that's it for my early Stanley Cup predictions. So the Carolina Hurricanes, and then keep your eye on the Los Angeles Kings and the New York Rangers. I'll be updating these predictions throughout the season, you know, as the season develops as well. I'd love to hear what your guys' thoughts are on the Stanley Cup predictions at this point. Hear which teams you guys are backing at this point. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.